Welcome back to the Tundra, episode 24, presented by Nicolet Law. He's John Kuhn, Packers legend. I'm Matt Schneidman of The Athletic. Before we get started, as always, do us a favor. Dish us a subscribe on YouTube at the Tundra GB, on Instagram and X. We really appreciate it. Okay, John, it's been a couple days since Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst talked to reporters. Normally his season-ending press conference is, a week after the season ends, but this time it was a couple weeks after because he had to finalize his contract extension and then get back from Mobile, where he was watching the Senior Bowl and scouting this year's draft class. But there are a couple things I want to touch on from his near 40 minutes with us and kind of spin them forward. So first, and you and I have talked about this on past shows, Brian Gutekunst, in response to my question about whether the personnel staff needs to put more of an emphasis on special teams, and I'll read the quote later because I want your thoughts on this first, basically said, we already put plenty of emphasis on special teams. We've been putting more emphasis on special teams from a personnel standpoint in the last 4 and 5 seasons, and we've seen the payoff. If Brian Gutekunst was hooked up to a lie detector when saying that, would the needle start going like this?
No, I believe that they did put an emphasis on it, right? When Rich Bisaccia came in here, he was going to have input on a lot of players, and you saw a lot of players come in, the Dallin Levitts of the world, the Zane Andersons of the world, Keyshawn Nixon. Don't think for a second he wasn't part of a pairing with Rich Bisaccia. But quite frankly, this year they kind of got thin there with guys that are directly impactful to just special teams, and that was specifically seen at kick returner and punt returner, because Keyshawn Nixon wasn't returning kicks this year, and you had the injury early on to Jaden Reed. So really, when you're talking about the return units, which were the worst part of their special teams, the kickoff, and most specifically the punt return, the easiest way to fix those is get a high impact returner, right? So even though you can address it, and even though you can put a lot of time and thought and energy and resources there, sometimes it doesn't hit the way that you want it to hit.
Yeah, and fans are up in arms about Rich Bisaccia, but Brian Gutekunst expressed a tremendous amount of faith in Bisaccia. Here's his quote from last week talking to us. He said, I have a lot of faith in Rich and what we're doing there. I think the last game, obviously, we missed some kicks. Brandon had made 32 straight going into that game, so we certainly didn't see that coming. But he also added, like we talked about, I think over the last 4 or 5 years, we've probably put more emphasis on teams than we ever have. Certainly, when I was working for Ted Thompson, obviously, Ted was a special teams guy, but we were never really going to have a player that was strictly a special teams guy. He had to play a position and have a major kind of role or developmental role as a position player on offense or defense. And then Gutekunst went on to say that philosophy has kind of changed under Rich Bisaccia. However, I remember Rich Bisaccia saying last preseason, when we're trying to, us reporters are trying to decipher who's going to make the 53-man roster or not, and we're asking Rich about the special teamers to fill out the bottom of our projections, Rich said in his 20 years as special teams coordinator in the NFL for various teams, he's never been part of an organization that has included a guy on the 53 for special teams ability before offense or defense. So what Goody is implying and what Rich is saying kind of contradict, because Goody's saying we've emphasized special teams over offense and defense more with Bisaccia, but Bisaccia is saying he still is part of teams that emphasize offense and defense more. Bottom line is, and I think you'd agree with this, they do have a handful of guys that are special teams centric guys, like you said. Zane Anderson, Nick Neiman, even going back to a guy like Tyler Davis.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah McDuffie used to be one. But if they want to get better across the board on special teams and not just be good on coverage units like they were this year, more so than the return units, they have to put that special teams centric emphasis, say that 5 times fast, across the board. Because like you said, they don't really have a guy for kick returns only or punt returns only. Not since Keyshawn Nixon didn't want to do it. And Jaden Reed was kind of that guy, but then he got hurt. So I guess you can include him in that bunch. But I think that emphasis has to be more widespread than it currently is if they really want to see kind of an overall better improvement than in just, half the phases.
And it's a tug of war, right? When you're deciding that last third of the roster, the last 8 positions on the roster, you're negotiating guys that are good at special teams, but also can play offense and defense. And some teams say, hey, listen, if you're not a starting safety, you better perform on special teams. That's how you're going to make this team. And just because teams say that doesn't always mean that they implement that. And sometimes a guy's going to be kept for the upside of the defense, even though somebody's a little bit better at special teams. I agree with you. At the end of the day, the focus needs to be on having the players that do play special teams, having them be locked in, bought in to the process, because some of these players might be fantastic on special teams if they feel a little more pressure. Here's another thing you can throw out there, because I remember playing special teams against Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman when they were winning all pros in the NFL at the linebacker position. You can throw some of your starters out there too. Not for every special team, but maybe have an Edgerrin Cooper on punt team, and I have seen him there sometimes, but I'm just saying maybe you implement a little bit more of some of these starters into the special teams if they are impactful in special teams themselves. But the only way it gets to be like that is if it's emphasized all the way throughout the organization. Goody, Matt, and so on and so forth, all the way down, so that people feel like the special teams is 1/3 of this team when they go and take the field. Not every team feels that way.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on that, I think that is probably a better solution than just filling the bottom of your roster with guys who aren't really going to play offense or defense and only play special teams. And like you said, that's kind of what the Packers try to do now. They have Xavier McKinney playing on special teams. They have, Jaden Reed there. Keyshawn Nixon used to. They even threw out Josh Jacobs there on kick return against the Bears. I know that was an isolated scenario, but starters playing more on teams is certainly another solution. All right. There are 3 players in my mind, or 4 actually, that could be cap casualties, some more so than the others. And Brian Gutekunst is never going to sit up there in early February and say, yeah, we're going to cut this guy. In fact, on February 1st, 2024, I believe it was, Brian Gutekunst stood at the podium inside Lambeau Field and said he absolutely expected Aaron Jones back with the Packers. And then, as I reported at the time, they offered him about a 50% pay cut. Obviously, Aaron Jones wasn't going to take that.
Oh, they offered him? They offered it to him?
Asked him to take a 50%.
We're going to offer you 50% off of your salary
offer
this year
was the wrong
to be our
word.
running back.
Asked him to take one. So my point is, take what Brian Gutekunst says at the podium with a grain of salt. So I say that to say, when he says he expects Nate Hobbs and Aaron Banks back, and he expects Rashawn Gary back, but then adds the caveat, I expect them back because they're under contract, that doesn't mean anything. Aaron Banks is probably going to be back. Nate Hobbs very well might not be. Rashawn Gary very well might not be. So I know people might take what Brian Gutekunst says about those guys as they're going to bring them back. Of course they will. But look at the fine details of it. If a player's under contract, he expects them to be on the team. Brian Gutekunst is not saying technically that he plans to keep them on the team. He's just saying, if they're under contract, I expect them to be on the team. He might be planning to make them not under contract. That's my point. You got to really read between the lines with this stuff.
And you mentioned 3 guys whose contracts are in a high spot that can very well renegotiate those contracts. And
Elton Jenkins too.
Kick the can down the road a little bit. I think with Elton Jenkins, you're talking about an offensive line that really needs depth, really needs help, and he's coming back off of an injury. So how does that thing get negotiated? I would not be surprised if Elton is back, but with a reduced salary, with a reduced contract, I would not be surprised if he left. Quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Rashawn Gary is back on this football team, but at a reduced rate, a much reduced rate. I saw today, Rashawn Gary has like the 23rd or 25th highest cap hit going into next year's football season. That cannot be something that the Packers go forward with.
Across the entire NFL?
The NFL, quarterbacks and everything.
That can't happen.
That is not something that can go into next football season. But if you let Rashawn Gary walk, and I'm going to say it right here, if you let him walk, you better have a big time plan for how you're going to replace that. And I know Rashawn's production went down towards the end of the year, but the production at the beginning of the year was fantastic. And if you can find a way to get that and Micah Parsons back, I mean, then you have a rotational. It's tough because you definitely you can't have Rashawn Gary at the number that he's at, but I'd still like to see him be a Green Bay Packer in some capacity.
39th highest cap hit next year for Rasheed Gary, according to Spotrac. A little over 28 million is his cap hit. So not far off. Something I asked Brian Gutekunst about, and this time of year is when you got to start these conversations with agents and representatives for players that are extension eligible. A couple important guys that the Packers could extend as they are either done with their rookie contract or entering contract years. Guys from the 2023 draft that were not first round picks. Tucker Kraft is entering a contract year. Brian Gutekunst said he's already been in touch with Kraft's representatives about how they feel about Kraft. And Brian Gutekunst made it pretty clear that he wants Kraft here for the long term. That's not a surprise. But the question is, do you try and get a deal done this offseason as he's coming off a torn ACL? Do you want to wait to see how he is halfway through the season? Do you try and sign him now? Because if he starts playing well, Tucker Kraft can very well within his right go and say to the Packers, no, I'm not negotiating during the season. I'm going to wait to hit the open market to really maximize my value. Or like with Christian Watson, are you going to go for some more financial security now and maybe make a win-win decision, if you will, and say, I'm going to take the money now, and then maybe a couple years down the line, renegotiate, as opposed to just waiting for the open market because I might not be the same player coming off a torn ACL. So that's one to watch. Quay Walker is another one. Kingsley Enagbare is going to be a free agent. Rasheed Walker is also going to be a free agent. Romeo, Doubs, Malik Willis. This is an interesting time of year for the Green Bay Packers, John, and a lot of key decisions await Gutekunst and his staff, and LaFleur for that matter, in the coming weeks.
You said a lot of names there. And out of the names there, I expect Tucker Kraft to get extended. I expect something to be done on Christian Watson's deal, more of a long-term solution there. And I would say out of the pending free agents that you named, the only one that I would anticipate a chance of coming back would be Quay Walker. And I think that is probably slim because of the way that their markets are going to be when they hit the market. Mm-hmm. It's going to be so high. Romeo Doubs, I find no place for him on this team, unfortunately, because of the receivers that they have and the number that they would have to pay him. And I liked what Romeo Doubs did for this football team.
Oh, yeah.
I liked what he was able to do. And I know the onside kick and all that was standing. I liked Romeo that can't afford it. You can't do it, not with the wide receiver room you have. And having to get Matthew Golden more involved in the offense, that's number one. Rasheed Walker, he's just going to demand too big of a number out on the free agent market to be able to bring him in. And if you did bring him back, where's Jordan Morgan going to play? Because the only position that I heard that he's capable of playing is left tackle after this past football season. That's a joke and a little bit of tongue in cheek, but you get my point there. And who else did you mention there out of pending free agents?
Kingsley Enagbare.
Kingsley Enagbare is an interesting one because if you could get him at the right price, you could potentially then shuffle him and Lucas Van Ness instead of Rasheed Gary. You could save a lot more money in that regard. So that could potentially be a spot there. And that could bring JJ back. And I like what JJ did at the end of this football season. And again, these guys that we talk about on the defensive side, they're going to play a couple of games, maybe a full month of the season without Micah Parsons. You're going to need some guys that have been there, done that to be able to anchor it down, kind of keep the boat afloat until Micah comes back, and then they can start playing at a much higher level.
Later in the show, we're going to get deeper into the top 5 positions, excuse me, that we think the Packers need to address this offseason. Spoiler, defensive end actually is not on my list, so I'm glad we're talking about it now because guys like Baron Sorrell and Colin Oliver could also, take on elevated roles in their second year. Glad you brought up Jordan Morgan, John. That's a good tease for our next segment because a big discussion point this offseason is who is going to start at left tackle on Jordan Love's blind side next season. We're going to talk that, Malik Willis, and a couple other things that Brian Gutekunst touched on right after this. You're listening to The Tundra.
This episode of the Tundra podcast is brought to you by Nicolet Law. Unlike football, life doesn't have an off season. You get up, you work, you take care of yourself and your family. When an injury happens, it doesn't just disrupt that routine. It can take over your entire life. The daily expectations of life do not stop, and now you're dealing with medical bills, insurance headaches, and a whole lot more. Nicolet Law. They've played a key role in thousands of injury recovery stories. Their attorneys fight insurance companies, investigate claims, and work to understand the full impact of every single injury. If you've been injured, you shouldn't be expected to manage your claim on top of everything else. So call 1-855-NICOLET or go to nicoletlaw.com.
Welcome back to the Tundra, presented by Nicolet Law, episode 24. John, a couple more things that Brian Gutekunst touched on in his season-ending press conference. And look, you've been around Gutekunst long enough to know that he is not going to say too much at the podium. He's not going to say anything he doesn't need to. He's not going to put his foot in his mouth. But
do you get bothered by that?
No, because I understand that he doesn't owe us anything. It's not in his best interests to give us great tidbits. And while I would maybe like him to be more honest and truthful at the podium, I understand that's not part of his job. So it doesn't bother me. No.
I think it's hilarious. You look around the league and you get these postseason press conferences like they had in Buffalo with Brandon Beane and Pagula, their owner, and you just start looking at the way the Packers do it, and you're like, thank God we do it this way. We don't need to throw people under the bus on the way out. We don't need to, try and send one messaging and then potentially give a different sign this way. I mean, the fact that Goody goes up there and basically takes the same heat from the fan base every single time. He didn't really say anything. He's so complimentary of the team. Well, yeah, that's what you want your general manager to do.
Yeah, and I say that to say the most forthcoming thing he probably said, and I could be wrong, but this is just pops off the top of my head, is when he's talking about Malik Willis and the backup quarterback position. He said, obviously, we'd love to have Malik back, but at the same time, to be realistic, I think he's going to have a lot of opportunities to maybe play more than he would here. So that's basically saying it's not, doesn't take a rocket scientist, if you will, to know that Malik Willis is not going to be a Green Bay Packer next year. But when you're sitting in those Brian Gutekunst pressers and you hear him say something actually truthful, and you're like, okay, that's true. You're like, oh my God, he actually said something. So that's why I wrote down in my notes, Malik gone, because Brian Gutekunst is basically admitting that. Because the normal Brian Gutekunst quote is, yeah, Malik had a great season for us. We'd love to have him back. We'll see how it goes in free agency. Basically, he's like, no, he's going to get a chance to at least compete for a starting job elsewhere. And I think a couple teams that could be at, Miami's the obvious one, because they need a new quarterback, and Jeff Hafley's the head coach, and he went against Malik Willis in practice this season. John Eric Sullivan's the GM. He's seen Malik up close the last 2 years. And, well, I was going to say Nathaniel Hackett's their quarterback's coach, but he's now the offensive coordinator in Arizona for Mike LaFleur. So Arizona's another possibility because Matt LaFleur's younger brother is the head coach of the Cardinals. So he has a good reference for what Malik Willis would be like as a quarterback. And then Nathaniel Hackett is now the Cardinals offensive coordinator. And he was around the Packers this past season as a consultant. So he knows what Malik Willis is like. So I'm going Arizona or Miami for Malik Willis this coming season.
Yeah, and then you got that dynamic of Green Bay South battling with LaFleur West and trying to bring in Malik Willis as the quarterback. I'll say this. I think Goody recognizes it, and just like I do, Malik Willis has earned an opportunity to compete as a starting quarterback in the NFL. You can watch what he's done the last few years as a reserve, but in those reserve roles and make an argument that he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the National Football League. And to get an opportunity to start is something that everybody is proud of within the Packers organization and excited for him to get that opportunity to get that big payday and to go out there and to compete for the starting job. And I hope he does great. Malik is such an interesting guy. He understood why he was brought in here to back up Jordan Love. He took advantage of every moment that he had to go out there and showcase his own skills. And he's just a good, nice guy. I can remember going up to him before his first start. This was just the second game of the regular season last year. He had only been here for about 20 days. And this is the day of the game. And I go up to him on the field real quick. I just want one sentence that I can write down so I can quote him in the pregame kind of hit that I do with Wayne Larrivee. And I'm like, Malik, hey, can I ask you a quick question? I introduce myself. And he's like, right now? And I'm like, Yeah, I need something real quick from you. He did not want, he was so focused on playing, but he gave me about 60 seconds worth of content, which I was so thankful for. And he went out there and balled out. So I hope the dude goes somewhere that works in a pairing, because a lot of times in the NFL, it's all about fit. So whether that's Arizona, whether that's Miami, whether it's, I'd hate to put him in this place, but Oakland. I mean, I hope he goes somewhere that he fits well and could potentially compete and earn a starting job.
I hope he doesn't go to Oakland, because there's not a team in Oakland, so he wouldn't have a team to play for there.
Or Vegas.
I'm just messing with you.
You know what I mean.
Couple other things, and this is along the lines of Brian Gutekunst just saying what's politically correct. He was steadfast in his statement that there will be competition at the kicker spot this offseason. But he said that doesn't have anything to do with Brandon McManus's performance. He just thinks it's healthy to have competition there. Now, lie detector test, it might have something to do with Brandon McManus's performance, but Brian Gutekunst is not hooked up to a lie detector test when he's talking at the podium with us. So I know this is very much a what have you done for me lately league, and what Brandon McManus has done for the Packers lately is about as bad as it can get. And Brian Gutekunst said now that McManus didn't really let on as injured as he was earlier in the season with that right quad injury, I believe it was. So that's probably on McManus if any of those misses during that time were because of his health or lack thereof. But it will be interesting to see how they approach the kicker position, because there wasn't competition going into this season with McManus. They had, Mark McNamee, then they bring in Lucas Haversick, but McManus had a free runway. Now he's not going to. So I would imagine it is partially because of some performance. So that'll be interesting to see if it's Haversick or someone else. Because, John, in today's day and age in the NFL, don't you need a guy who can really bomb it? And can McManus do that?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about 50 plus, yes. If you're talking about bombing it like the guy down in Jacksonville, kicking him 70 yards, no. Not many kickers in the league can do that. But field goal kicking in the NFL has gotten to be very efficient, especially from deep range, much more so than even the days when I was playing. And it's really kind of fitting, right? The Packers, we had that one good offseason where we went into training camp and we said, our specialists are set. We got a bomber punter. We got a kicker that can put it through the uprights. I mean, 2 years ago, Brandon McManus was the savior for our special teams, because he came in and fixed something that took many years after Mason Crosby and trials and tribulations to figure out. He came in and basically just saved that position for us. The injury last year, the communication, was it really the injury? Did he have a little bit of yips? Whatever. Goody has seen the entirety of Mason Crosby's career at Green Bay. He saw Mason have really bad seasons, bounce back the next year and have tremendous seasons. McManus is going to have an opportunity to follow in those footsteps and really improve this year. But if he goes out there in camp and he has any lingering of accuracy, like we saw at the end of this football season, well, when he was injured and then in that playoff game, they could potentially have a tough decision on their hands.
And then what could also be a tough decision, but on a much bigger scale, I would imagine, not to diminish the importance of the kicker position, and John teased it last segment, who is going to protect Jordan Love's blind side? I think it's pretty clear that when Jordan Love has time in the pocket, he is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But in games like the Denver game in the second half and the Chicago playoff game in the second half, things fall apart when he's under siege. So part of that is who's playing left tackle. Rasheed Walker is a serviceable left tackle in the NFL. Those guys don't grow on trees. Spotrac, I still don't know how to pronounce it, forecasts Rasheed Walker getting a contract in free agency worth more than $20 million per year. Packers ain't paying that. ESPN has their top 50 pending free agents. Rasheed Walker is number 8. Not number 8 offensive lineman, number 8 overall.
8.
Overall.
That's how important they are. Which just goes to show you Packers aren't going to pay him. And maybe part of the reason he started this year was so they can get that nice, juicy compensatory pick for next year's draft. Jordan Morgan or Anthony Belton, John? Simple question. Who are you starting at left tackle if the season started tomorrow? Jordan Morgan at left tackle because I like the ability of trying to continue to grow Anthony Belton at right guard. There might be a competition there; it might actually take place, but just kind of watching feet movement and how they work. Belton on the inside, man, saw some good stuff out of him. Still is raw, very raw. Throughout the course and even when the season ended. But I like his size. I like his push. I like his punch at guard because when you talk about who at that position, if you put Morgan at left tackle and Belton at right guard, you're better off than putting Belton at left tackle, even if he's better at tackle and Morgan at right guard. Overall, that's a better pot. But hey, there's 5 positions on the offensive line. And right now, I only have one that's spoken for, and that's Zach Tom coming off of all the injuries at right tackle. That whole lineup is of utmost importance as the Packers approach this offseason, free agency, the draft, offseason training camp, all that stuff.
As we record this on Tuesday afternoon, I have a story up at The Athletic today, kind of diving into Gutekunst's comments about Jordan Morgan from last week. And what he said, Cliff Notes version, is that Jordan Morgan ideally would practice only at left tackle if they plan for him to start there next season. But Gutekunst said that's unrealistic because they're probably going to cross-train all of their offensive linemen. But John, if the Packers intend for Jordan Morgan to start at left tackle, he's a guy who's only played 51 snaps there in his career in games that matter. And those 51 snaps were not with Jordan Love at quarterback. They were in week 18 of this past season. He also played there in the preseason, played well. Jordan Love didn't play this past preseason. Put on your coach's hat for a second. Why wouldn't the Packers just practice Jordan Morgan at left tackle if that's where they plan to start him? And he hasn't played really any meaningful snaps there in the regular season yet.
Well, they haven't had a practice yet. They haven't got their offseason roster put together yet. We're going to see when they go through free agency, when they go through the draft, and when these guys start entering the field for IPWs and OTAs and any other acronym that you want to put together for these things. When they start taking the field, I have a feeling Jordan Morgan's going to get the king ransom of snaps there, barring some free agency pickup.
Okay, fair enough. The only reason I threw out Anthony Belton's name is because he played a tiny bit of left tackle this year and also was a 3-year starting left tackle at NC State. So, but I do understand what you're saying about if they want to get their best 5 out there, Belton at right guard and Morgan at left tackle is probably the way to go. It's interesting you said, though, that only one position is spoken for. I get that at center because Sean Ryan's a pending free agent. I think the Packers would be probably wise to re-sign him. The number 3 overall free agent is Tyler Linderbaum, the center from the Ravens. He's going to get a lot of money. Sean Ryan can probably be had for relatively cheap. And he played well, all things considered, after filling in for Elton Jenkins. So center's obviously not spoken for yet. Right guard, left tackle are probably interchangeable. That's probably going to be Belton and Morgan in some capacity. Left guard's not spoken for. I would find it hard to believe that Gutekunst would release Aaron Banks or admit that quote-unquote mistake this soon into his tenure as a Packer.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have to release him, right? Banks can. A lot of this hinges on Elton Jenkins and what happens there, right? Sean Ryan went in and played center and got better as the season went on. What would more time for Sean Ryan at center have looked like? And what if Sean Ryan started the season at center and Elton Jenkins started the season at guard? What would it look like there? If Elton Jenkins comes back, I know there's a contract that needs to get adjusted if he does. And then Belton at right guard, how would he fit in? There's a lot of different permutations that you can look at that offensive line and who they already have without even talking about who is going to be new and brought in.
Yeah, I just don't know if they'd put a guy in Aaron Banks who is coming into the season with a $24.8 million cap hit on the bench. And Elton Jenkins is an interesting one because he turned 30 years old 2 months ago. He's coming off a major injury. He wasn't great at center. He got better as the year went on. But if you've cut him, you're freeing up about $20 million in cap space. So that has to be enticing for a Packers team that is currently over the cap by just a hair. So do you move Elton Jenkins back to left guard since center didn't work out? There's a lot of, like you said, moving parts on the offensive line, and they have to get it figured out because we had a guy on a couple weeks ago in TJ Lang. That's what the Packers need to get back to on their offensive line. Guys like that who can keep Jordan Love clean for extended stretches. Wasn't quite that this season. All right. Wrapping up the show next segment, John and I have each concocted our short list of the Packers' top 5 positions of need. Maybe not positions of need, but positions that need to be addressed in some capacity this offseason. During the break, think of your own 5 and see how close you can get to ours. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Tundra. Welcome back to The Tundra, episode 24. John, this segment is brought to you by Potawatomi Sportsbook.
Yeah, and they want to let sports bettors know, and I'm talking all sports bettors, whether you're new to the game or can knock out 16-leg parlays with the best of them, the premier sports book you want is smack dab in the heart of Milwaukee, the Potawatomi Sportsbook. Not only are there over 90 different sports betting kiosks, there's also all-star fine dining, first-class drinks, a giant video board, which will amaze you, and more. It's nothing short of awesome. So make your way down to Potawatomi Sportsbook. Bet above the rest.
You know who else, John? I think I can say this. We'll be at Potawatomi Sportsbook in the coming months. We will for a potential show there. So stay tuned for some more details on that. We love the good fine folks at Potawatomi Sportsbook down in Milwaukee. Okay, John, to wrap up the show here, I asked you to make a short list of your top 5 positions the Packers must address this offseason. That could be free agency, the draft. It can be positions the Packers just need to focus on and don't have an answer for next year. It doesn't necessarily need to be holes they have and need to fill from the outside. So we're going to go one by one on our list. I'll go my number 5. You'll go your number 5. Then we'll alternate and give a brief little synopsis of why. My number 5 is backup quarterback. We saw how important the last 2 seasons the position of backup quarterback was. We talked earlier in the show about how Malik Willis ain't coming back. The Packers need a reliable backup quarterback. We know how much Brian Gutekunst likes having multiple starting caliber quarterbacks on the roster. Right now, they just have Desmond Ridder and Kyle McCord, who they signed to a reserves futures deal. Shout out Syracuse. He was the 2024 Syracuse starter and ACC all-time single-season passing yards leader. I'm not sure I'm comfortable if I'm the Packers trotting into the 2026 season with Ridder or McCord as the backup just yet. So we'll see what they do externally if they do add someone.
That's a good one if Malik Willis is not back for the Packers, which is probably unlikely. I'm going number 5. I'm going running back. This might surprise you, but I do it for a couple different reasons. Emmanuel Wilson now is a restricted free agent, which means he's likely to be back to the Packers, but somebody could go out there and offer him something to come in and compete on a team that's light at the running back position, but likely he'll hit free agency next year and could be gone. Marshawn Lloyd, I don't know if he's ever going to play for the Green Bay Packers after 2 years basically being redshirted. And Josh Jacobs, we saw this year, even though he's an absolute warrior, his health and durability is a big key to being effective. And even the games that he played when he was injured, he had some games when he was effective. Then he had some games where he only had 6 carries because Matt LaFleur needed to put him on a pitch count. I think very quickly the running back position could look different in Green Bay, and I'd start preparing for it now.
That's a good point. I still think Jacobs is back. Here's just a quick bit of what Gutekunst said about Jacobs last week. Josh is a warrior.
Oh, Jacobs is back. He's back.
Yeah.
I just mean in the sense of filling that position for the future.
Right, absolutely. And Gutekunst was asked about the mileage on Jacobs, and he said, Josh is a warrior, really important part of our football team. I think he's got a lot of good years left. So, all right, my number 4 is tight end. Tucker Kraft is obviously your number 1. He is on track, it seems, to play in week 1. That will be 10 months post-surgery. So, even if he doesn't play week 1 and he misses a game or 2, he's going to be your number 1 guy. He was playing like one of the best tight ends in the NFL, if not the best one at the time of his injury in week 9. But behind him, we saw that precipitous drop-off after Kraft went down. Luke Musgrave, early in his career, it was the injuries that stunted his growth. He's just not the guy. You can't have him play a significant role on the team and expect him to, be a significant contributor. John Fitzpatrick, who filled a nice role as more of a blocking tight end and more of a wide tight end, he tore his Achilles against the Bears in week 16. And then you have Josh Whyle, who is, I think, a nice third or fourth tight end, but I think you need some depth there in terms of a guy who can actually go out there and make plays, unlike a Musgrave, especially as Kraft returns from a major injury.
It's funny. I did this list honestly, like what I honestly thought were really important needs for the Packers. And you just brought up two, and backup quarterback and a tight end position that you definitely want to have some answers for as we start going forward. But I think number 4 for me, I put above both of those, no doubt, defensive line. And I don't care if you talk about rush edge opposite of Micah Parsons or interior defensive line. We had the injuries to the biggest pieces in Devontae Wyatt and Micah Parsons. And then you have so many question marks. What's going to happen with JJ Egnabari? What's going to happen with Rashawn Gary and his contract? How's Lucas Van Ness going to bounce back from another season with the injury that he had? So I think D-line is so very important, not just in getting after quarterbacks again, but being able to stop the run that we saw them do so well at the beginning of last season, but fall off towards the end.
Okay, I got a little more specific with my number 3. I said interior defensive line. I didn't put defensive end on the list because I think that is one that is pretty easily fixable or addressed.
Well, okay, so defensive end though. Micah Parsons coming off an injury.
Yeah.
Rashawn Gary might not be back. JJ Egnabari might not be back. You feeling comfortable with Lucas Van Ness and Baron Sorrell on the outside?
Yeah, actually, now that I look at what I wrote in my notes, I did write top 5 positions of need in draft/free agency. I presented this segment as just top 5 positions to address. I actually did a separate story last week of top 5 positions to address, and defensive end, I think, was number 2. So this is a little different, top 5 positions of need in draft free agency. So I apologize for presenting it the wrong way. My list still stands, and I'm sure yours does as well. The reason I don't have defensive end on here is because I don't think they need to add there in the draft and free agency, because I think they already have the pieces on their roster right now. They just have to figure out which pieces they're going to elevate, because like you said, Rashawn Gary, Kingsley, and Agbari, their futures are uncertain. Lucas Van Ness is going to be back. Baron Sorrell is going to be back. Colin Oliver is going to be back. So you have 6 guys that you're 6 guys, including Parsons, Gary, and Agbari, Van Ness, Oliver, Sorrell, that you'd be comfortable trotting out there next year, but you can't trot out 6 guys next year. You got to slim that group down. You want more opportunities for the young guys. You got to open up cap space. You got to spend money. So we'll see what they do with that position. But I said interior defensive line for where they need to address in the draft and free agency, simply because we saw the drop-off after Devontae Wyatt went down, both in Dallas and then after the season. That group's just not the same. Colby Wooden, they can call him the general. Carl Brooks makes a couple nice plays, but they need a real guy, a real dude in the middle in case Devontae Wyatt, another guy who's rehabbing a significant injury, is not back to his normal self, or even if he is, just to take more eyes off a guy like Micah Parsons when he gets back.
Yeah, I agree with that. My number 3 is returner, and it seems pretty high on a team, but when you talk about being historically bad at punt return and then Keyshawn Nixon not wanting to do kick returns, I don't care if you get a guy whose premier spot is punt returner and that's what he does, and you talk Keyshawn Nixon or you ask Keyshawn Nixon to take some kickoffs and help out there, but you got to address return. That has to be an off-season approach where you bring somebody in that's going to return punts, potentially return kicks, and maybe even Keyshawn Nixon fills that role a little bit, but returner has to be a spot that you address.
My number 2 is O-line, specifically the depth. We talked about that group earlier. They would seem to have their 5 starters on the roster right now. Let's say it's Jordan Morgan, Aaron Banks, Sean Ryan, if they re-sign him, Anthony Belton, and Zach Tom. But we know there are going to be injuries on the offensive line. There are every year. Who's stepping up next? Rasheed Walker is probably going to be gone. Is Darian Kennard back? They need to figure out who is going to step up into those starting caliber roles if guys go down. Because the guys who stepped in this year, quite frankly, weren't good enough. Elton Jenkins might not be back. So they got to draft O-line or sign some veteran depth pieces in free agency to really shore up the depth of that position group.
Yeah, you mentioned offensive line. I'm sure you're going to mention cornerback next. I'm going to mention cornerback.
Don't ruin my list.
2.
You don't know what I'm going to do.
I'm going to mention. Go ahead. Pick a different spot then. I'm going to mention cornerback number 2 and offensive line number 1. You got 5 offensive linemen. You got 3 cornerbacks on the field in nickel predominantly. And I still like Keyshawn for the majority of the snaps that he takes on defense. I still like Carrington Valentine, more of a reserve role, but he's capable out there. Nate Hobbs, can he have a bounce back season specifically if he's put in the slot? I think they're one big time cornerback away, and I think they're more offensive line questions away from being fixed there. So I go cornerback number 2, offensive line number 1. What's your number 1?
You took my answer, cornerback. And here's why. I've been on record many times on this show saying I think Keyshawn Nixon is a starting caliber outside cornerback. I think he had a solid first half of the season. Second half of the season, not so much. I think the Packers need a true lockdown corner because they need to marry that coverage with the pass rush. When you have Micah Parsons healthy, you need guys on the back end who can lock down too. And you need guys on the back end who can cover for longer to help the pass rush get home. I don't know, and I don't think Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine are a Super Bowl caliber outside cornerback duo. Could Nate Hobbs be back? Could they sign a guy in free agency? A guy like Nashawn Wright, who had a bunch of interceptions this year. Or Newsome from the Jaguars, I believe, after the Browns traded him. Do they use an early draft pick on a cornerback? Brian Gutekunst has shown a willingness to do that with guys like Jair Alexander and Eric Stokes. And even a guy like Josh Jackson in the second round who didn't pan out. But I think Keyshawn Nixon is probably more of a number 2 guy. He's going to ask for a pay raise this offseason. Are the Packers going to give it to him? That's something else to watch. But you need a true number 1, or at least a guy that you think can become that one day. Because right now, I don't think the Packers have a guy on the roster who can become that bona fide number 1 cornerback, or is that?
I got one last question for you.
Yeah.
Trayvon Diggs released. Any chance they bring him back?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a chance. But
because I saw it like this. Goody had an opportunity to give him a tryout against Minnesota. They kept him on the roster for depth and emergency. He played 1 snap in the wild card game down in Chicago. But this is a chance where you can really interview a guy practically, watch him practice, watch him study film, watch him prepare with your defense for games, and then actually go out there and play in a game, albeit somewhat meaningless against Minnesota, but see him perform in your green and gold. I mean, I think there's a chance that the Packers bring back Trayvon Diggs because they know exactly what they can offer him contract-wise and exactly what they're going to get out of it after this interview.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't know if that's a guy you can bank on becoming that number 1 guy. And I think you might need that guy, or at least have a guy in the pipeline to become that one
Absolutely.
day. So we'll see what the Packers do this offseason. Green Bay's own John Schneider is a Super Bowl champion, De Pere native, former longtime Packers executive. The Packers are chasing that. The Packers are chasing that Lombardi trophy in hopes of bringing it back home next year around this time. All that stuff we just talked about, those are the steps the Packers might need to start taking in order to get there. We appreciate everyone for listening. As always, follow us on YouTube, The Tundra GB, on Instagram and X at The Tundra GB. For John Kuhn, I'm Matt Schneidman. Thanks for listening.